You know, this game does something rather ingenious when it comes to dialogue choices. For instance, there's this one part where you have to get a guy to fix a bridge, but he needs to know the name of the bridge, and the dialogue option to select that specific name doesn't appear until you've actually read the sign next to the bridge itself, which has its name on it. And it's a pretty clever way to incorporate dialogue selections like that without opening the door to sequence breaking. So, out of all the suggestions sent in, this interesting little game was the only one suggested twice. And it's one I've actually been wanting to take a look at for a while now, since it's kinda unique as far as DOS shareware titles are concerned, that game being God of Thunder. Now, at first glance, you're probably thinking to yourself that this is some kind of cheap Zelda knockoff, which is far from the actual truth, since this isn't really much of an adventure game in the first place. Sure, the action component plays like a Zelda game, and it definitely has that console-inspired feel, but the game's so short and so linear and has so few items to use that it really doesn't fit the bill as an adventure. In fact, this game kind of feels more like an experiment. A fairly well done experiment nonetheless, since it's highly self-aware and doesn't overstay its welcome, considering some of the sections you have to go through are really annoying. But also short, so once you're past them, you never have to worry about them again. The only negative thing I have to say about the game really is that you need to be a double major to play it, because if either your action gaming skills are rusty, or your puzzle gaming skills are rusty, you're probably not going to get very far. God of Thunder was originally created by Impulse Software, who changed their name to Adept Software not too long after, and was published through the Software Creations Bulletin Board system in 1993. Although it seems like an adventure game on the surface, it's more apt to call this a single-player action-slash-puzzle game, and you'll see why as we dig into it. It runs primarily in a VGA 320x240 256 color video mode, but occasionally it switches back to 320x200 for brief moments, most notably for the title screen. As for the audio, it supports the PC speaker and Sound Blaster cards for sound effects and ad-lib cards for music. As for its current release date, the game was made freeware by Adept Software quite a while ago, and is thus easily obtainable from their website at www.adeptsoftware.com. If you want to track down a physical copy, they're pretty rare but also not very expensive because of the lack of demand. So you shouldn't expect to pay more than about $10 to $15 if you do find one. I'm pretty sure the story of this game doesn't follow actual Norse mythology, just because it seems a little ridiculous, but at least most of the references are accurate enough. You play the role of Thor, god of thunder and son of Odin, ruler of all Asgard. Odin himself, being as powerful as he is, still needs to take extended rests to recharge, known as the Odin Sleep. During one of these Odin sleeps, Thor's brother Loki, being the god of mischief, decides to take advantage of Odin's absence and bands together with two of his most trusted allies to take command of all of Midgard, the world of men. Eventually, Odin awakes and realizes what's going on, but is still too weak from his slumber to get involved, so he tasks Thor to go after Loki and his accomplices to save Midgard from their tyranny and restore peace to the land. To assist, Odin bestows upon Thor a powerful hammer called Mjolnir, apparently made by the King of Trolls and enchanted by Odin himself. While the hammer's ability to pulverize entire mountains is absent from the game, its ability to return to its wielder once thrown is definitely present. God of Thunder is primarily a top-down game, where you move around the screen and throw your hammer at enemies to defeat them. You have 2 status bars to keep watch of as well, your health and your magic. If you run out of health, you die, and your magic is needed to use most of the special items you come across. To replenish magic, you pick up potions or touch green angels. To replenish health, you pick up golden apples or touch red angels. And you can also find jewels, which act as the game's currency, even though it's mostly just used to lock you out of areas until you've amassed enough wealth to prove you can explore and solve puzzles when presented with the opportunity. I'm only going to briefly mention the controls because they're kinda weird. You use the arrow keys to move, Alt to throw your hammer, Control to use your selected item, and spacebar to change which item you have selected. It takes a little getting used to. But then again, DOSBox has a key mapper for situations just like this one, so you'll probably want to take advantage of that. Heck, even if you use a joystick, you'll still want to, since this game doesn't seem to do anything with buttons 2 through 4 on joysticks and gamepads. Anyways, back to the gameplay. One of the first things you're sure to discover is that every time you leave a screen and go back to it, the enemies all respawn, meaning you should do your best to completely clear out a screen of treasure and items on the first attempt, rather than having to clear it out multiple times. Fortunately, due to the highly linear nature of the game, you'll rarely need to go back to a screen you've already cleared. Another thing you're sure to discover soon enough is that you have unlimited lives. Every time you die, you simply restart the current screen from the same state you entered in it. This means that if you take a ton of damage and then leave the screen, you're going to be stuck with that new health level until you can replenish it. So if you start getting wailed on by the enemies, it may be better to just die than leave the screen the instant you come back to life. That way you're not pointlessly losing health when trying to escape. And then you're going to start to discover enemies that can insta-kill you, like spiders and these one-eyed worms of sorts, and if you're like me and grew up renting NES games all the time, that's when it's going to suddenly hit you. God of Thunder is a cross between The Legend of Zelda and The Adventures of Lolo. Now, as I said before, this is not an adventure game by any means, but it does have elements that make it seem like it would be. For instance, each part of the game has a town you'll visit where you'll have to solve some problems before moving on. And these town sections are pretty interesting, as they help to build on the lore of the game and provide some comic relief in the process. But outside of these town sections, you're pretty much just following a linear path of action screens, puzzle screens, and sometimes action and puzzles in the same screen. Those being some of the most difficult and annoying sections in the entire game, since it's very difficult to solve puzzles that are based on not only your reaction time, but the reactions of enemies, all while trying to dodge their attacks. Though you do find a few items as you travel, mostly magical items you can use at the cost of magic to help you out, such as restoring your health, defeating enemies, running faster to dodge past enemies with insta-kill attacks, etc. You'll also find key items used to advance the plot under certain circumstances, though you never acquire more than a single such item at a time, and typically they're automatically used when you talk to the right characters who utilize those items. Overall, God of Thunder is a decent game, but very difficult, as it commands both action skills and puzzle-solving skills, and sometimes requires you to do both at the same time. If you can handle that, then you'll probably enjoy this game. But if you're deficient in either of those categories, the game's simply going to frustrate you sooner or later. It also definitely has that console game feel to it, which is a rare thing to find from an early 90s DOS game, but understandable considering how exclusive it was to make games for consoles back then. In short, it's worth trying at least once, but only players who can handle both intense action scenes and mind-bending puzzles will have the patience to see it through to the end. As far as DOSBox is concerned, while the game does work with the max and auto cycle settings, you may experience occasional stuttering in the frame rate if you do, so I recommend a fixed cycles count of about 10,000 instead. Joystick support also works without any additional configuration, though again, you'll need to use DOSBox's keymapper to get any of the buttons past the first one to do anything useful. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Shouldn't take too much longer to get everything sorted out and get myself back into my usual routine, so we'll get back to the regular-sized games in the next episode. As for episode 114 itself, we'll be taking a look at what might be the only game out there where Pocket Rocket is a legitimate rocket ship and not just innuendo. I suspect a lot of you already know which game I'm talking about, so be sure to send your guess as soon as you can to adg@pixelships.com and stay tuned to see just how ridiculous this thing can get.